This is your World War III update. Something big is brewing. So there's an old saying in war, an old understanding, I should say. It's not really a saying. It's the idea that when battles are raging, don't fear the sound of battle so much as the deafening silence, which is inexplicable and perhaps unearned. A silence in the heat of an unresolved conflict usually means that big plans are being hatched. And this is a truism that has been demonstrated throughout the last 3 to 4 years. It's a lot like a couple who's fighting with one another. So long as a couple is fighting, okay, that means that they both care enough to be angry about something. It's when they go silent. That's when the big break is coming. That's when divorce is coming, okay? So where am I going with this? Well, every theater of conflict around the world, from Venezuela to now China, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, the Middle East, Lebanon, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Ukraine, Russia, they're all just festering, percolating, simmering, and waiting to explode. Today, there was an attack in Poland. Now, I'm going to get into that in just a minute, but I think more importantly, there was an assassination attempt on Sergei Shoigu, who used to be the defense minister of Russia. I believe now he plays a role in the National Security Council, if I'm not mistaken. But he was demoted. Regardless, still a key figure in the Russian leadership. He is part of the National Security Council. And there was an attempt to assassinate him at a funeral. And they're not sure who did it, but they're presuming that it was these Ukrainians that I believe the GRU arrested, if I'm not mistaken. But don't quote me on that. I don't have all the details of the story. Regardless, this assassination attempt is huge, because for the Ukrainians to be targeting the Russian leadership, we know that there's been attacks on Vladimir Putin or attempted assassinations of Vladimir Putin. And because of plausible deniability, I think the Russians let it go because they know there's extremist factions who are operating in and around adjacent to the Ukrainian government and NATO who are potentially trying to provoke the Russians. And of course, we know that the Russians have the strategic forbearance of Buddhist monks, and perhaps more appropriately, Sun Tzu, as in The Art of War. But if everybody has a breaking point at some point, and for them to attempt to assassinate Sergei Shoigu was very, very significant, okay, because that was a blatant attempt, and the FSB uncovered this device that was there that was set to explode when Shoigu went up and, paid his respects at this graveyard, and it didn't happen. Now, if that would have happened, I don't know what the response would have been, but it probably would have been massive. A lot of people are of the persuasion that the Russians have been holding back, and that it is only their commitment to keeping this conflict at a conventional level and it not going nuclear, that's the only reason why they haven't targeted Ukraine's decision-making centers. There's another school of thought that says, well, they simply don't have the capability to do so. I mean, it's hard to pinpoint exactly where somebody is going to be with a missile at any given time. It's very difficult, especially when the Ukrainian leadership is so incredibly guarded by the MI6 and the CIA and the best of what NATO has to offer. They are protected. So there's two schools of thought. One, that Ukraine is simply that good at being a moving target, and this is why Zelensky hasn't been taken out. And the other school of thought is, well, if we get rid of Zelensky, we got to deal with somebody else, and then we potentially martyr him, and there's all those complications. Now, on the topic of the Polish explosion on the railroad tracks and the attempted attack, which, while there was two separate incidents that people are saying is going to start World War III, And I'm going to tell you why that specific incident is just going to be, another straw on the camel's back. Will it break the camel's back? Probably not, because it seems as though either the Poles aren't ready or they know that maybe this is a Ukrainian SBU operation. They're not saying it, but and there's definitely high-ranking Polish officials who are implicating the Russians in this. But essentially what happened was there was a railroad track. There was a sabotage on this railroad track, which is a track that goes from, the western part of Poland to the eastern part, for the sake of simplicity, towards the Ukrainian border. I'm not sure if it goes right to it, but it is a key railway hub that is vital for logistical support to Ukraine from NATO countries. Okay, now one of these trains that was attempted to be sabotaged, I believe, a down power line, and it's hard to say if that wasn't just a bunch of misfits or who that was, but there was one incident where it was a down power line. I presume a power pole, which was downed on the tracks, which was an attempt to derail the train. And then there was another, which was an actual explosion that attempted to derail a train, but it had far fewer civilians on it. So one of the trains was primarily used for military supplies sent to Ukraine. The other, I believe it had like 475 civilians on it. Now, the Russians there would be absolutely no benefit whatsoever from them attacking a civilian train. That would clearly be something that was, or very likely, and unimaginably so, something that was potentially orchestrated by the Ukrainians in order to try to provoke a response from Poland and NATO. But I don't think they're that dumb. I mean, it has to at least be a military target for it to be plausible that it was the Russians who wanted to do this, because it would be very outside of Russia's normal for them to explicitly target civilians. I mean, they could have been doing that all along in Kiev. They don't have the missiles. They need to take a counter-force approach to things, and that means targeting military targets. So the amount of weapons that they do have, they need to be allocated towards military targets, and it does them no good in the eyes of the international community to be targeting citizens, especially in Poland. Okay, so the idea that they did this intentionally to cause harm to civilians, I think, is a bit silly. Now, the Ukrainians can't be that dumb to do something that is so obvious. So perhaps in the instance of the train derailment, that was in fact an act of hybrid warfare. And because that was a military train that was transporting various supplies to Ukraine, and there were fewer civilians on board, that is plausibly maybe the work of Russian intelligence. And of course, it would be very minuscule in comparison to the hybrid warfare that's being waged on Russia from NATO through the Ukrainian proxy, right? I mean, Ukraine is bombing inside of Russia all the time. And sure, it hasn't spilled over into any one of Russia's other allies, per se, who are perhaps supplying Russia, if we want a direct one-to-one comparison. Nonetheless, there's a clear disproportionate amount of attacks being accommodated and facilitated by NATO on Russian territory versus Russian territory on NATO territory. Like, the Russians are surrounded. They're at an extreme disadvantage in the grand strategic picture. If it wasn't for China, I mean, it would be, it wouldn't be looking good. So that's something to keep in mind. But since 2022, Poland claims that they've detained around 55 individuals suspected of espionage or sabotage that are linked to Moscow. Now, in October, it's important to note that Poland and Romania arrested 8 people, including a Ukrainian citizen, accused of sending explosive packages to Ukraine. Now, what does that mean, Ukrainian citizen, right? Does that mean they were a spy for the Russians? I mean, it's, unless you have all the details, we're never going to know, right? But it seems as though right now there is a bit of reticence on the part of the Poles to immediately come out and blame the Russians for this. And that is because I don't think they are quite ready yet. It's either they don't think they're ready yet, or they knew that this was an intentional provocation by the Ukrainians. There's another rumor circulating that this could potentially have been some, extremist faction of a fringe element of the German government who is getting back at the Poles for their role in Nord Stream. So, obviously Germany, Poland, there's a reparations spat between those two that's been ongoing, and I still think that there are many things that have yet to be resolved from World War II. Both of them are saying that they want to be the most powerful military in Europe. So clearly, Poland does still have a chip on its shoulder because of history, and that they must be looking at what's happening in Ukraine with the Banderites and things of that nature. And obviously, Poland is stuck between a rock and a literal hard place, between the Soviet Union and what was at one point the Third Reich. So anyways, you guys get the point. So they're in a fairly unique situation. The chief of the General Staff of the Polish Armed Forces, Kukula, said that it seems that an attack on Poland is being prepared. Russia has already started preparing for war. Remember, Vucic, the Serbian president, said just a few days ago that it seems like a fait accompli. We're going to war in Europe. It's a done deal. Everybody's preparing for it. It's inevitable. Well, Poland held an emergency National Security Council meeting after these explosions, and they do believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that it was a deliberate act of sabotage. The question is by whom? Because right when they admit that it was an act of sabotage, that's when, the emergency or Russia's DEFCON equivalent starts to lower, meaning that they enter into a heightened state of emergency readiness, because that could potentially be something that triggers an Article 4 meeting, which could potentially trigger an Article 5 NATO intervention. Now, there's increasing talk of a missile shield, a no-fly zone, air defense, and it seems as though NATO is just waiting for the time to get involved. Zelensky inked a deal for 100 Rafale jets today, which I believe are capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Of course, so are the F-16s. They're saying it's a matter of whether or not they're going to have the pilots to do it. It's not, I don't think it's Ukrainian pilots flying these things anyways. I think it's likely, very likely, Western retirees. And I think that was something that was even floated, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I said that, before anyone in the news said that years ago, that they don't need, you're never going to know it's a Ukraine pilot, because anytime the plane goes down, it's going to go down over Ukraine territory. So they don't have to worry about whether it's an American pilot or a Polish pilot. If somebody is doing it off the books as a private contract or whatever, then, it's something that can't be traced, essentially. And the Russians would never know, even though the Russians do know. But they're going to play dumb for reasons of keeping the conflict sub-nuclear. So that's what's essentially going down there. Now, throughout all of this, there was a Russian, I believe the Doomsday radio station was sending out some weird signals today. I'm not sure if I have that information here. Oh, yeah. The UVB-76 activated around 2:35 Moscow time, which I believe was around the time that this bombing was uncovered, or that might have been just a few hours prior. So, they could have been putting their armies on notice that something might be developing here, and you guys need to be ready, because, the Russians are always waiting for the Ukrainian provocation that's going to prompt NATO to enter into the war. They've effectively been playing a game of intelligence whack-a-mole ever since 2022, trying to alert the Americans and the CIA and kind of putting all the information out there before any false flags are conducted, in order to kind of front run it and so they can't be blamed for, at least not, with such culpability. So anyways, what's interesting, and something I didn't know, this is an interesting piece of information. Firstly, the two messages were heard in a sequence, and I'm not going to repeat the sequence because I'm not going to bore you to death, but one of the words mentioned was the word Latvia. The meaning of the codes is unknown, but historically, these messages have often preceded or coincided with important or unusual events. The reference to Latvia is notable because the Baltic region is obviously currently quite tense. Latvia and Lithuania have strengthened their defenses. Poseidon patrol craft, of course, are circling around there. We had B-52s flying along the border recently. But also, and get a load of this, Ukrainian drones allegedly hit the power supply to the UVB-76, temporarily silencing it, implying that the station is still active, valued, and protected. So, I mean, think about that. We had Operation Spiderweb where they tried to take out the nuclear bombers. We seen them try to take out the nuclear radars. Now they're trying to take out the Doomsday radio station. I mean, are they trying to take out Dead Hand as well? I mean, that is huge. I mean, that really should have been what I led with in this video. That they tried to take out the power supply to the Russian National Emergency Strategic Radio Station, which goes all the way back to the Cold War in terms of its importance. And this is, the equivalent of like our emergency action messages that would be relayed and sending the codes to the nuclear submarines to launch. And the Ukrainians trying to destroy that. Now, why would you be trying to destroy that? What purpose could that possibly serve? Which is not to say that this Doomsday radio station doesn't send out signals that are probably related to, conventional warfare strategy and certain levels of readiness that don't necessarily entail some sort of nuclear escalation, but usually they do. Okay, it's so rare that this thing goes off in the way that it has recently, that's why, a lot of people are suspecting that, this means that things are most certainly escalating, and I'm not going to belabor the point at all. I always say beleaguer instead of belabor. It's one of those, it's like, what is it, that other word that people say they put, irregardless. It's not a word, folks. Anyways, who cares? You get the point. This is huge. This really, between the Shoigu assassination attempt, never mind the Putin assassination attempts that have happened this year, but this Shoigu one was like, they had the device that was supposed to blow up Sergei Shoigu, okay? And for them to be targeting the nuclear command and control, or one essential aspect of it, I'm sure there's a lot of redundant systems above and beyond this. That tells you that somebody's getting desperate. Now, if this was the Russians who targeted the logistical supply chain, literally, supply train, I should say, in Poland, then that also says something about Russia's situation, okay? People think that they just got Donbass in the bag because of the collapse of Pokrovsk. Yeah, it's significant. Nobody's going to deny that these battles on the front are very important. But what's also important is that Russian crude exports are in the pisser. In fact, they're starting to descend now back to where they were at the lows of 2022, which was rocketing the price up. The Americans have very strategically made deals with the Saudis now to give them F-35s and all this stuff, so they open the spigot as much as they possibly can. And of course, now you have stuff going on with Venezuela to keep the pressure and keep the price suppressed. And now it looks like the Senate is going to vote on whether or not to impose these 500% tariffs, which Trump appears to be expressing more of an interest in doing so. So a lot of big things are going down. So what I'm saying is, if it is true that this was a Russian sabotage, exactly what it looks like, then that means that the Russians are getting a little desperate as well. Or in the very least, they're trying to send a message to NATO that, you guys need to back off because this war is coming your way. Now, if the head of Polish National Security Council is saying Russia is preparing for war, and we know how these people tend to mirror and project what their true intentions are, perhaps that means that Poland really is going to war. Look, I'm trying to look at this as objectively as possible, okay? Because I know there's a lot of people, oh, is he pro-Ukrainian? Is he pro-Russian? I'm pro-truth. I'm a prepper. All I care about is what is the likelihood of bad shit happening, which is not to say I don't care about the human suffering that's involved on either side. I hate that. But I'm trying to look at this not from the perspective of pearl clutching and propaganda, and the Ukrainians are the good guys and the Russians are the bad guys, or, the Russians are the good guys, the Ukrainians are bad guys. I'm trying to just understand what's going on. And the fog of war is very thick. So I give you both perspectives. Maybe the Russians are desperate and they're starting to be forced to target deep into Poland. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Like, that really wouldn't, that's nothing that's going to make a huge difference, targeting one railroad track. But it's something that perhaps there's plausible deniability. So maybe that's why they did it. Maybe it was a bit of a fear tactic. Oftentimes these acts of terrorism backfire because it only emboldens the other side and gives them a reason and a scapegoat. But it could be that there are, in fact, they know that something is about to come in from there. Maybe they know the tomahawks are being moved into place. I mean, there's so many angles to consider here that all you need to know is that something big is brewing. Now, we've had massive exchanges in that theater in the last week, but it's almost like if something isn't happening every day now, people think that, it's dying down. That's the problem, right? You can only, it's when they're fighting, when that couple is fighting, there's still hope. They're preoccupied with the fight. It's when things go quiet that always precedes these huge onslaughts of drone salvos and missile salvos that are launched in both directions. So just something to be mindful of. Now, with respect to Venezuela, the playbook is exactly the same as it was in Iran. So you have a situation where Trump is now saying, well, we're going to maybe talk to Maduro, and exact same shit that we've seen with Iran. They were putting all those, they took months and months to keep moving things in position. Then they pulled things back from Diego Garcia, and everybody was like, oh, okay, maybe it's over now, right? And there was negotiations, and Witkoff was in there, and they had plans to meet the Iranian. Boom, right? War begins, and all bets are off. So that's exactly what's going to happen with Venezuela. They're saying that Maduro is making these offers to give, most of the oil fields to the United States, which just seems preposterous. Either that is a way to make them look like sycophants by ingratiating themselves to Trump and to just make them look weak, or it's just an attempt to try to get the Venezuelans to lower their guard. And unlike the Iranians, the Venezuelans, they don't have the kind of firepower and capability and the sheer size of the country. And it's a very dense forest. I don't think it would be, probably wouldn't be easy to fight a ground war in. But if you have defectors, then, that's how you're going to get your decapitation strike. And with Palantir and the technology they have nowadays, anything's possible. But when you see Maduro moving through a crowd of people with very limited security and moving through a mosh pit, okay? And this guy's tall. He stands out. He could easily been sniped. That tells you that he has a lot of support in his country, and a lot of what they're saying is probably bullshit about the guy, right? To pretend like this is some sort of narcotic sting is just, I mean, that they're going to move billions of dollars worth of equipment to kill a few cocaine traffickers. Look, this is bullshit. Most of the drugs that are killing people, they're turning people into zombies, is coming from China. All right? So, or at least the components anyways. So this whole thing is, it's like the Iraq war mixed with the Iran war, with all the temporizing going on and the strategic ambiguity, and exact same playbook. So I give it, honestly, now that the USS Ford is there, I really give it a few days. I think we'll see the war start in the next couple weeks in Venezuela, beyond a shadow of a doubt. I mean, I don't know what Polymarket's saying. I really don't care. It's not nearly as accurate as people say. It's asymptotic. So as you get closer and closer, it gets more accurate. But, you know, did it get the Trump presidency right? Yes, but there was also a bias there too. So I'm not really entirely sold on Polymarket as being, nor the wisdom of the crowd, especially when you look at the crowd nowadays, because that's the situation we're in. No, I think that nobody knows, but I would almost, if I'm going to go on Polymarket, I can't go on Polymarket because it's illegal in Canada. Damn, I would be rich by this point. Okay, anyways, if you want to support the channel, check out Freeze Dry Wholesale Foods, the best, highest quality, delicious freeze-dried foods from friend of the channel, Steve Syros, the #1 source for food from, for all of the branches of government and the military. Unfortunately, not all of I think he sells military rations, but not everybody gets the creme de la creme, the top tier freeze dry wholesale stuff, the lobster and all the crazy stuff they freeze dry that lasts 25 years. And check out Jace Medical. And don't forget, there's still a few odds and ends left in the warehouse at CanadianPreparedness.com, because I know the storm's coming and I don't want to have a huge store full of stuff when the shit hits the fan. That was my epiphany that I had. Part of it that prompted all this. Yes, it was tariffs. Yes, it was, the government just constantly breathing down your neck when you're trying to sell this stuff. It was a lot of things, but it was family and, well, there's actually several reasons. Family, not wanting to, I don't know, just feel the need to sell stuff to people. Like, as much as I want to help people, unfortunately, people took it the wrong way, some people. And they just, I've always wanted to have it. And there's nothing wrong because it's the most capitalist endeavor that you can imagine. But apparently I have a lot of communist subscribers who don't like free market economics and don't like getting high quality products brought to them at a fair price. Regardless, it was all that and just a feeling that I should get out before things get really, really hot, because I don't want a huge target on my back. And nothing says a big target on your back like and shit hits the fan, like a warehouse full of non-perishable food and survival supplies. You get the picture? Okay. Now, where should we go next? The Iranians, speaking of the Iranians, issued a mobile alert. The Islamic regime, that's a Western phrase, sends nationwide emergency alerts to citizens' mobile phones, signaling it may be preparing for war in December. Iran tested its mobile alert system on November 14, 2025, focusing on civilian preparedness amid regional tensions. Now, when we had Professor Zhang on here, he said that he thought that the war with Iran was going to start in a few weeks. Now, that hasn't happened. The misdirection that I think people were expecting with this Venezuela thing hasn't materialized, which is not to say it couldn't, because Iran's goose is getting pretty cooked at this point. I mean, you got them surrounded. Azerbaijan, Armenia agreement, okay? You got Russia with its hands tied with the Caspian Sea. You got all of these other nations, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, they're all kind of on the fence, playing both sides of the fence. You have the shitstorm brewing between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Pakistan is now going to be arming the Saudis with nuclear weapons, or they have a nuclear guarantee with the Saudis now. The Saudis now have this Article 5 thing equivalent with the United States, and they're potentially going to be getting F-35s, but who knows, that might not be till like 2035, and who's really going to fly them, right? And of course, you have the thing with Israel. Israel, Channel 12 is saying that Hezbollah goose is cooked also, that the Israelis are going to move in right away. Jordan is bringing back military conscription. I mean, there's so much chaos going on in the West Bank. It's basically just straight up ethnic cleansing at this point. There was some kind of task force that was authorized by the United Nations today, but apparently this was rejected by Hamas. It was this coalition of UN, peacekeepers that was supposed to go in there, and it's being rejected by Hamas. The Russians and the Chinese both abstained on the vote for that one. So, Iran, when you factor in the water crisis that they're currently dealing with right now, and presumably their nuclear program, which has been compromised, although not destroyed, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, who still claims that they have all of the highly enriched uranium, that it hasn't been destroyed. And this is why they're getting ready to do more sanctions and just more of a anti-Iranian policy with the E3 anti-Iran resolution. So, something big is coming. Why would the Saudis need F-35s and nuclear guarantees from Pakistan? That's only for one country. There's only one country that could potentially rival them, and it's Iran. Okay? So, and really Iran unto itself is not a huge enough threat, I don't think. When you combine everything, the U.S., Azerbaijan, Armenia, Israel, Jordan, Syria now under their control. Lebanon, is kind of 50-50. And just all of the other, they got Yemen, I guess, but they don't have a lot of allies in the region, which can muster a formidable fighting force. So, unless the Chinese and the Russians really do come to the aid of their southern flank, then the Iranians are in for a rough time ahead. And, perhaps this is the pressure tactics that they're trying to do in order to force regime change there. It's hard to say. But the Senate getting ready to impose potentially 500% tariffs on China, which would be just, it would crash the markets. Now, the Fed today said that they might not be, it wasn't the Fed chair, but it was some other guy. He said they might be not doing a December cut. So, of course, that spooked the market. I think they're just looking for an excuse right now to kind of cool things off without crashing it completely. Bitcoin has been destroyed. BlackRock's selling Bitcoin right now. That's serious. Michael Saylor was even accused of selling Bitcoin through some other channel, not directly, but he denies it. MSTR, MicroStrategies, is completely in the pisser, down like 60% from its highs. That's a huge Ponzi scheme. I'm not saying Bitcoin is going to crash at this point. In fact, I think there are so many hodlers that lost their keys, and that whoever owns the first million, probably a lot of those are never going to sell. So it's always going to have some value in a way. But, it's hard to say, what that really is going to materialize as, because they could come out with a better Bitcoin tomorrow. They really could. And anyways, so Japanese treasury yields are rising. The carry trade, that whole collapse of the carry trade has run its course, it appears. But all of these economic indicators, like, it's just teetering on the fence. Like, the market has clearly hit a ceiling here. And without the injection of large amounts of funny money, I can't see it continuing upward. And Trump is just become completely unintelligible. I don't know if you've seen him at the McDonald's thing today, but that guy is just now a Manchurian candidate. And, it's finally reached a point in the Overton window where I could say that without people losing their shit in the comment section because people are starting to see it. I was saying that since day one, not because I'm anti-Trump per se. It's just because I'm pro-truth. It doesn't matter who you put in there. I'm going to criticize them all the same if they're lying. And usually when they're politicians, when their mouths are moving, they're lying. But I mean, his babbling is just, it's becoming insufferable. And he was talking about the Iranians and how the bomb, it comes in this way because, it's got to come in fast. And it's just getting weird. And I understand, look, the guy's grinding. He's tired. He's old. Not many people can say, hey, I peaked in my 70s like he did, right? But it doesn't look good. Our goose is cooked. Our hands, we're in the hands of the neocons at this point. The Rubios of the world, the Lindsey Grahams of the world, those are the ones who are actually running the show right now. Russia and China running joint naval drills. So a lot of shit's going on in the East, too. I'm not sure if you've been paying attention to what's going on between Japan and China. Now, it was only a couple weeks ago that, wasn't it Trump saying that, hey, we're going to give Japan a bunch of weapons, and there were some comments on I think it was on the day that was commemorating the end of the war and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But there was some exchanges at that point. Now, Japan is openly threatening China to aid Taiwan. Should China attack Taiwan, Japan says they're going to come to their aid. Now, this is amidst the backdrop of the South Koreans making a deal with the Americans for nuclear submarines and doing their own nuclear enrichment because they, of course, want parity. They're worried about the North Koreans and the Chinese. So you got South Korea ready to go nuclear. Japan is now talking about hosting nuclear weapons, okay, within the same 48 hours of them threatening to come to the aid of Taiwan because, look, they're a proxy of the United States. There's troops from the United States in Japan. They're still an occupied country, just like Germany. Okay, that's World War II leftovers. And this has prompted China to issue a travel advisory. And this is very serious. They're issuing a travel advisory to Japan. Now, I don't know the culture, but, I know that there's, at least I've been told, there's a deep-seated, historical tension and hatred in some respects from China towards the Japanese for what they did in World War II, for the many atrocities that were committed. And, perhaps this just comes out of left field and the Eastern Theater opens up. And so with these Japanese yields soaring, and it appears as though, like with their crazy debt to GDP ratio, they could be seeing, implosion. So the best way to take attention away from that is war, right? So as the economy globally contracts, the likelihood of conflict increases. And yeah, that's what's going on. That's what's going on. Something's got to break. If we don't break geopolitically, people are just going to break mentally. The lives that people are living now, increasingly, it's only going to get worse. I mean, on the one side, you got, I don't know how many OnlyFans attention whores there are now with these emasculated benefactors funding their bank accounts. I mean, how sad is that? That's only going to get worse. Like, it's only going to get worse, and then they go to self-medication, addictions, cost of living is too damn high, nobody has any purpose. You think it's bad now. Just wait till people really start to lose it. It's going to be like a combination of a few movies. Bird Box, where people just start going crazy and, I see the light, right? They start killing people. The Happening, where they start offing themselves. And there was one other one. What was that one? The Crazies. It's an old zombie movie, but it's actually pretty good. Some of you probably haven't seen that one. It's from 2010. And, people just start going weird and become mass murdering psychopaths. So, yeah, I think it's somewhere, civilization is on its last leg with this AI thing. It's going to, and this is why you're seeing people turn to prepping. It's not just because we're preparing for the inevitable collapse and we unconsciously sense it coming. People's intuition, whatever animal hasn't been bred out of us that still, senses the storm coming. There's that, but it's also because it provides us a sense of purpose. I mean, why else would you downgrade your standard of living to go camping and build a log cabin in the woods? Or go into, like, every day I ask myself, I'm like, I don't have to do this. Like, I could live in a high-rise building and, nice glass balcony, and, I could have that life, and then there I am out there literally shoveling shit. And I don't need to do it. But then I realized something. It's like, I know why I do this. It provides me with purpose. And that's something that most people don't see. Like, most people right now, the angst that they're feeling and just the immiseration and the depression that they're feeling is due to a lack of purpose. And for a lot of people, it's like, oh, I'm in the rat race and I clock in, I clock out. It's kind of that, but it would be no different if you're on a farm. It just, you have more control over that situation. It's not so much the monotony. It is not that you are making, that you're just making ends meet. Because, in an agrarian lifestyle, you're always on the edge of starvation. You're just always barely getting enough sustenance to kind of maintain and, carry you through. You're never entirely secure is what I'm trying to say, but you have control over the situation. What people lack is control, right? Because very few people have real power in their lives. And when you have to go into work and you go into a cubicle and you're being told what to do and everything, and there's very few opportunities for you to make a real decision that isn't protocol based, that chips away on people, and not counting the fact that, the homes are getting smaller, the grass is turning into artificial turf, the yards are becoming non-existent because real estate is just too expensive, so it becomes a luxury. We are retreating into a virtual space to compensate for the lack of physical material space. And that's slowly driving us crazy. Like, it's social media on top of that. I mean, the childless masses, right? People who are just seeking attention, just nonstop. And these short videos, reels, TikTok, is just driving me fucking crazy, to be honest. I see myself scrolling on it, and I'm like, man, this is just, it's disgusting. It really is. Because it's, you get nothing out of it. Half of it's AI, okay, half of it's like fake prank videos. The other half is thirst traps. That's 3 halves. I'm a guy. Sue me. But it's just pointless shit, like nonstop drama. Oh, cop, gets in a fight with somebody over a parking ticket, and, it's just the dopamine, and you pair that with the drugs, the high cost of living, the fact that most people aren't in a relationship anymore. I mean, it is a ticking time bomb, man. Like, this is not going to get better. It's not. And this is why, people talk about rewilding. People need to rewild. And it's not just for preparing for the apocalypse. It's keeping your own sanity. Focusing on something that you can do, that you're building. Maybe it's just, like right now, my mission is to plant a forest. That's my mission. I'm not going to see the results of that. And I'm wrestling with this, right? Because it's like, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent. For those of you who stick around for the wisdom part of the videos, here we go. If this is even wise, I don't know. But I see myself wrestling with this idea, like, because it's a very selfless thing to plant a forest. The amount of money I'm going to need to really invest and the amount of time to make sure that nature, that these thousands of trees are going to get established. I'm not really going to reap any immediate benefits. It's something that I have to do for the future generations. But there's something about that I've realized that, once you get to the top of the mountain in life, it's fucking depressing, man. Like, it really is depressing for a lot of people. And when you really look at it, it takes you, take me between 4 to 12 hours to climb a mountain, depending on which mountain it was. And you get to the top of the mountain and you stay there for 15 minutes or so. And then that's it. You go back down, and it's like in Forrest Gump when he just stops running and that was it. He just was running and running and then I'm going to stop now. I guess what I'm trying to say is age-old truism. It's in the journey, not the destination, but there's so much truth to that. Because it's only when you have everything that you realize that you start envying nothing. It's when you have everything you wanted that you start. This is when, even Western society had a tendency to do this. And I'm not like a cultural appropriation in a political sense, but it happens, right? Because in our whitewashed society, in the nice, clean, tidy matchbox suburbs, people get bored. So, let's try yoga. Let's try, something esoteric from some other country, in order to feel whole, right? To feel human again, to feel, And sometimes it manifests in pop culture, like some stupid, trendy song or Gangnam Style or, just something weird like that to feel human, to feel alive. It's when you have everything, that's when you get depressed. So this is why people prep, right? On the one hand, it gives you a sense of purpose because it's like, okay, I feel special. I'm preparing for the end of the world as we know it. But on the other hand, it's also like, you don't realize it, and most people don't realize this when they're doing it, but you're doing it because it's giving you a sense of purpose, something that we don't have today. See you later.